I am thrilled to introduce Mary Parmer to all of you. Mary Parmer is from the Diocese of Texas. Austin is her home. She belongs to a great parish down in Austin, St. David's Episcopal Church. Mary is really, in one sense, hard to introduce because it's hard to say exactly what you do, in part because you do so many different things, and in part because she's kind of a guru, she's kind of a coach, she's kind of this wise person for the Episcopal Church. And let me tell you why I say that. What she does formally, she coordinates something called the Gathering of Leaders, which is with the retired Bishop of Texas, Claude Payne. It's a gathering of young Episcopal priests and leaders in the church. It's been ongoing for a number of different years, and it's parishes and priests and leaders in situations that really want to focus upon health and thriving. There's so much negativity in the press and in parts of the church, but there's so much help in being more vocal and focused on places of vitality. So she coordinates that work. She also coordinates the Diocese of Texas Newcomer Ministry Project, and that's primarily why we have her here. She has an incredible amount of experience in thinking about how parishes grow. She has, in one sense, a program, but even more than a program, Mary has a way of thinking about the way parishes grow. In the simplest terms, she calls it invite, welcome, connect. And the reason why I want her to be here is Grace St. Luke's, in my estimation, does a really fantastic job of inviting and welcoming. We are growing. That's wonderful. It's that connect piece that in the next few years I want to see us spend more time on. She's going to talk a little bit about the inviting and welcoming piece and a bit more about connecting. And please join me in welcoming her to Brothers Forum. Welcome, Mary.
Thank you.
Go get it. That's so careful. You got it.
Thank you. Thank you, Richard, and thank you for having me. And I thank Lee for picking me up this morning at the hotel. And are Terry and Pat here? Bev and Pat. Bev, there you are. Hey, Bev. Bev and her husband Terry took me out to dinner last night, and it was really lovely. Thank you, Bev. And I'm loving being here in Memphis, so thank you for that invitation. And so I want to start out this morning just asking you all a question. I want to know how many cradle Episcopalians we have in the room. Raise your hands. All right, look around, y'all. Look around. Okay, so the rest of you came out from another tradition, right? All right, let's hear it. Southern Baptist, here we go. Methodist, raise your hands. Presbyterians, there we go. Lutherans, any Lutherans in the room? Catholics, got some Catholics. Church of Christ? No. Mormons, any Mormons? No. Any non-affiliated? Some of those, you're scared to raise your hand, I know you are. What about any, have I left any off? Raise your hand if I left anybody. Yes? Assemblies of God, there you go. I'm sorry I left you. I've got to add that one to my list. Any others? No? Okay, so if you see where I'm going, I want to just tell you that I'm going to give you a brief story. This morning when Lee and I were driving here, I asked her a couple of questions, and I start out generally when I'm really digging into this work, and I don't have a group this large, I ask people to go around the room and tell me where they grew up. So I asked Lee that. She grew up in Longview, Tyler, Texas, East Texas. And I asked her if she grew up Episcopalian, and she said no. She grew up Southern Baptist. And I went, there you go, Lee, we have something in common. And then I generally ask, so how did you make your way to the Episcopal Church? And that question is always fascinating to me because it's a gazillion different answers that I get. So my story is I grew up Southern Baptist in Natchez, Mississippi. How many of you have been there? Natchez? So I tell people, and you would know this here in Memphis because it's the town that Sherman missed on his way through the South, burning the South, right? So it's got all these really, really wonderful, beautiful antebellum homes. And I grew up middle child, Southern Baptist family. My father was a deacon. My mother was a Sunday school teacher. I tell people we were drugged to church, us 5 kids. all the time. We had a drug problem. We were drugged to church. But our home was very hospitable, and we had all the visiting missionaries. So I grew up in a real family, a hospitable family, got married, went to Mississippi State for 2 years, go Mississippi State. And then we moved all across the South. We were married, had a couple of children, landed in Beaumont, Texas in the early 90s. And I went through a divorce. And I was left as a 40-year-old with a 16-year-old son and an 8-year-old daughter. And so I opened a business recruiting physicians. And one morning, I was real active in the community and was active at my church. And one morning, I was sitting in my office and I received a phone call from a woman who sat on a couple of boards with me. Her name is Sally Dooley. And Sally said, "Mary, I'd love for you to go to church with me sometime." And I said, "Where do you go to church?" And she said, "I go to St. Mark's." Everybody knew where St. Mark's was. I knew where St. Mark's was. I had found St. Mark's in the back door of St. Mark's by going to an Al-Anon meeting. I had some family members who had problems with alcohol and drugs, so Al-Anon is for families, and I had begun working the 12 steps of Al-Anon and found a therapist who happened to be Episcopalian. My therapist gave me books to read that, growing up in Natchez, Southern Baptist, I had no clue who C.S. Lewis and Henry Nouwen were, and those were some of the books she had me read. Anyway, so I really decided to go to church with Sally, and I accepted that invitation, and I went to church with her on a Sunday morning in the fall of 1995, and it was pretty powerful. It was pretty overwhelming. The first time you go to a liturgical church is pretty powerful. I had no idea that what drew me in was the liturgy. I didn't know what to call it. And so during the next year I struggled. I had a sense through working with this therapist and through Al-Anon, I had real healing and reconciliation, and I had a sense that God was calling me into ministry. And I struggled with that because there I was in my early 40s. I'm Southern Baptist, I'm a woman, I'm divorced. What do I do with that? And so about a year later, it was in August of 1996, I was on the Young Life Committee. And my Young Life leader said, "Mary, didn't you go to an Episcopal church a while back?" And I said, "I did." He said, "Well, I go to a little small Episcopal church on the other side of town, St. Stephen's, and we have a new rector. And I think you would like him." And I didn't know what a rector was. I had to ask him. And he said, "He's from Alabama. I think you'll like him." So I go to St. Stephen's that Sunday morning, August 16th, 1996, and there was Patrick Gahan. He grew up in Birmingham, and it was his first cure as a rector, and he welcomed me. I was in his first confirmation class. There were 2 of us. The church had a big split. And during the next 5 years, I wound up closing my business. I became director of adult ministries and evangelism, and I wound up staying on staff there for 10 years. Now, during that first 5 years, under Patrick's leadership, he had a gift for empowering laity for ministry. And during that 5-year span, the church grew by 300%. He had that gift of administration like Richard has, and he very relational, so I learned a lot from Patrick. Patrick left, we had 5 rectors in 5 years, and it was just a mess after that. But what held the church together was the fact that we as laity understood that we were empowered for ministry. So after being there for 10 years, once again, the Holy Spirit kind of blew through my life, and I felt like I had never finished my degree. I sold my home. I accepted a terminal sabbatical from the church, and I went to St. Edward's in Austin and went back to school full time and got a degree in religious studies. As I was getting ready to graduate in the spring of 2009, I got 2 phone calls. I had no clue what I was going to do with my life, right? 2 phone calls. The first one was from Bishop Claude Payne, and they needed a director for this movement that we call it the Gathering of Leaders. And so they hired me to be the director part-time. And then a couple of weeks after that, I got a phone call from Bishop Doyle's office, and Bishop Doyle was the new bishop for the Diocese of Texas. And he asked me if I would help the diocese do something about the declining membership in the Episcopal Church. Now, I want to tell you, I had had a couple of articles published, and I was getting ready to head off to Harvard Divinity for a 2-year theological studies degree. The reason I said yes to Bishop Claude Payne was because, remember the woman that picked up the phone and invited me to church way back 10 years ago, or more than that, 14 years ago? Sally Dooley had been at something called The Gathering in Houston, where Bishop Claude Payne was casting his vision for the Diocese of Texas. And he told everybody there to go home and invite 2 people to church. I was one of the 2 people that Sally picked up the phone and invited me to church. And Sally, I think, is probably an introvert. She was just doing what her bishop told her to do. And so, I couldn't say no to Bishop Payne. Now, as I began looking at, what do I do with what Bishop Doyle wanted me to do in terms of hospitality and welcome, that's how it started out. They gave me 3 congregations, pilot congregations for this project, and then we had one more congregation that I'll talk to you a little bit about. St. Francis asked to join the project. And so in the spring of 2010, I began working with these 4 congregations, creating what has today become Invite, Welcome, Connect. But before I go any further, I want to tell you that the Gathering of Leaders is an invitation-only group for young Episcopal clergy leadership group. Richard's been invited to that gathering of leaders, and so he just told me this morning, he said, I promise you I'll get to one of the gatherings next year. We have these little 3-day gatherings all over the country, so I'm going to hold him to it. But you're blessed. You're blessed to have a rector who is known out there. He was probably nominated by, he was nominated by one of his peers to be part of this group. So as I started putting together the material, I started looking at what the work that I needed to do around hospitality was much bigger than just the welcome piece. So I'm calling it Invite, Welcome, Connect. The Invite essential is really giving our congregations tools for helping us invite people to church. The Welcome is Ministry of Hospitality, and the Connect essential, as Richard said, is the essential really that a lot of our churches have problems with. So during the last couple of years, I started doing trainings in our diocese, and as I developed the material, more and more churches joined the project. We started seeing the results of people who were using the material, and I have to say that as Richard said, I've been looking at your website and looking at all the things that you do here, and you are doing, I'm thinking, so my first thought was, when I really started digging into the ministries that you have here and the things that you're doing, even the things like the name tags, I'm going, golly, Grace St. Luke's is already doing a whole lot of the things that I recommend that churches do. But the biggest thing about this Invite, Welcome, Connect work is that I've the vision statement, the mission statement, the overall mission statement for it is cultivating new practices of invitation, welcome, and connection that are rooted and grounded in the gospel of Jesus Christ will transform our congregations. And so I know that you've seen that here, and the very fact that you're growing and that you're thriving and that you have a lot of vitality is a real, it's really proof that you're doing a lot of the things that I recommend anyway. The core values for the work are to be prayerful about it, to be intentional, or to be relational, and then to be accountable. And when I go and I take the work and really, I think we're gonna have a little workshop this afternoon at lunch with some of your leaders and perhaps your staff. But what I tell congregations as they began kind of looking at materials, all the materials are online. They'll stay online. We're putting together a separate website for them, and then Forward Movement will be publishing training videos within the next couple of months. But what I tell people to do, and what I encourage is, and I can see that already here, we need to, use our holy imagination to imagine the limitless possibilities for each of our congregations. We need to create an environment where creativity is honored. And there's an old Al-Anon saying, when I have people look at this work, I say, it's take what you like and leave the rest. Some of the challenges that I've run into, I want to hit on those just for a minute. One of them is complacency. I think it's a big challenge that the Episcopal Church has. Another one is action. At the end of the day, we can teach, preach, and Richard can teach and preach it all day long, but if he doesn't model welcoming people and inviting people to church, then you all are not going to do it. Then I've run into what I call fears and assumptions. Episcopalians are fearful of that E word, that evangelism. And so what I do with the Invite Essential is I really just give congregations tools to help you invite people to church. And then one of the fears that I ran into was at a small diocese outside the Diocese of Texas, and I met with their vestry the night before I was to do a workshop. And one of the vestry members said, Mary, I like our church the size that it is. And I've run into that, over and over again across the country, because as you know, the Episcopal Church, we have, little small churches, but the way that I've created the material that I have is that it works for small congregations all the way to large congregations. But I had to address that fear the next day. And I think that what I tell clergy is that you have to address those fears. Those fears, one of our and what I call assumptions. One of our rectors at a large church in Austin, when I was first creating this work, we went to lunch and it was pretty apparent that he had not looked at any of the material. And at the end of the lunch, he goes, Mary, I love this guy now. It made me mad when I first heard it. He said this to me. He said, rectors at churches our size really don't want a program peddled to them. And I tell people that I almost threw up my lunch. But I called Bishop Payne, and Bishop Payne said, Mary, he just doesn't get it. Tell him to read my book. Bishop Payne wrote this book. It's called Reclaiming the Great Commission. And in there it says, evangelism really is all about just inviting people to church and being able to tell your story. And we have great stories in this room. If I had the time, I would go around and ask every single one of you, especially you all who came in from other traditions, how you got here. And your story is really important. It's important for people to hear and to know. And so why wouldn't we want to invite someone to a church that has given us so much joy? But it's something that has to be addressed. One of the obstacles that I run into, as I've taken this now outside of Texas and north of the Mason-Dixon line and just taking it around the country, is one of the biggest obstacles is what I call the sacred cows that we have. And I was in one diocese 2 weeks ago. This woman says this large church, downtown church, I guess 10 congregations came to this workshop. And this woman says, "Oh, sacred cows, Mary, we have a herd of those at this church." But we have to address them. One of the sacred cows that I ran into, I'm just going to tell you about one, was I was in this little church, and I can say this now because, Lee, you would probably know which church it was. And it was in East Texas, and there was a new rector there, and he asked me to come, and it was just when I was first creating this material. And so he was showing me around this little small, beautiful church on a Friday night, introduced me to this woman who was sort of a part-time staff. And she comes out, and I said, I bet it's hard to get people from the nave over to the parish hall for coffee. And she said, oh, it's very hard. And I said, you could have it right out here in this beautiful little courtyard. It's got oak trees all around. And she said, oh, no, we have bees. So I looked at the rector, he was brand new, and he kind of looked at me. So the next day, we finished with the vestry retreat, and he said, Mary, would you tell that story about the bees? And I said, sure. And I told the story, and this man was sitting there, and he grew up in that church. He was baptized there. And he said, Mary, I have never seen a bee on this property, ever. So this woman had decided that bees were probably attracted to donuts. But you know what? She was the gatekeeper. That was one of the obstacles. She was the gatekeeper. So we have to lovingly and creatively address those things, and it's a challenge. So as I began really kind of doing the work, the Invite Essential is really, like I said, evangelism. The Welcome Essential is ministry of hospitality, and then the Connect Essential that I'm going to dig into a little bit this morning is what I lovingly call close the back door. The reason I call it closing the back door, this woman comes running up to me at Diocesan Council 2 years ago, and Bishop Doyle asked me to make a report on this work. And this woman comes up and she says, you can't call it closing the back door, you can't call it that. And I don't mean lock the back door. But what I mean by closing the back door is I have seen in the medium to large size churches that as many people go out the back door as come in the front door. And if we don't take care of that Connect Essential, my congregation in St. David's in Austin is a prime example of that. When I finally convinced David Boyd, who I adore now, that he needed to have a staff person. It's an urban church, downtown church. And there was no staff person to take care of all those newcomers that were coming in. They hired Jennifer Gerber part-time, and she's moved to 3/4 time. Jennifer found in the files close to 300 welcome cards where people had filled out a card and nothing had ever been done with them. That's 300 souls or 300 families that nothing had ever been done with those. And when Jennifer started working there part-time 3 years ago, that church grew by 182 people that first year. And it's because that essential has been taken care of. The Invite Essential is really about inviting people not only to a relationship with you in this congregation at Grace St. Luke's, but into a relationship with Jesus. Personal invitation, and I'm just going to put this out there. Personal invitation is absolutely the most effective. They say that 3 out of 4 people, research says 3 out of 4 people who do not attend church say that they would come if someone bothered to invite them. Okay, 3 out of 4 people say they would come if someone bothered to invite them. The average Episcopalian invites someone to church once every 37 years. What we have to do with that Invite Essential, and I know you've done that here, you have to have already done that here, you wouldn't be growing. You have to create a culture of evangelism. It's moving out of our comfort zone, and trust me, God is continually having me move out of my comfort zone. It happens all the time. And it starts with leadership, and leadership flows downriver. Bishop Doyle has always quoted C.S. Lewis, we must be vessels of Jesus Christ in the world. C.S. Lewis says, if we're not about being Jesus Christ, then what are we doing? The deep truth of the Invite Essential, what I say is the deep truth of the Invite Essential, which in the Invite I cover giving tools. Oh, and one of the tools, Bev, one of the tools, remember that picture I wanted to take on your car last night? So one of the very simple tools in the Invite Essential is that you have window card decals. Either give your congregation the Episcopal shield to put on their car, but you all have these, and I need to take a picture of those before I leave, your car decals. Because believe it or not, that is an evangelism tool. It's a small evangelism tool. The deep truth of Invite is courage versus fear. The other parts of Invite are who are you in the community? All the people who live around Grace St. Luke's, are the businesses around Grace St. Luke's, do they know who you are? The last big part of Invite also is is communication, and it covers everything from your website to who you are on social media. And I haven't looked to see if you have a Facebook page, but I'll be taking a picture later on today. Facebook became a real ministry for me in many ways, and it still is. The second big essential is welcome. It's the ministry of hospitality, and Jesus really asked us to see other people as Jesus saw them. I tell a story about a friend of mine who moved from the Diocese of Texas, and she goes over to Atlanta, and she's looking for a church, and she's a professional. She's an attractive woman in her late 40s. She was really active in our diocese, and she gets dressed up and she goes to church, and she attends 4 different Episcopal churches. No one calls her, no one checks on her. One church, she goes back, she fills out 2 cards. Next thing you know, she gets a letter in the mail with a pledge card. And she called me one night. She knew I was working on this material, and she said, "Mary, oh my gosh, it's like people just don't even see me." Barbara Brown Taylor is one of my favorite authors, and she's written a book called Authors in the World. And in the book, and there's a chapter called Encountering Others. And she talks about going over to, Winn-Dixie or Piggly Wiggly, I forget which one it is, and going there all the time and buying her groceries. And there's a young woman there checking her out. She's got a name tag on. And she said, really, what I'm called to do is look at this young woman and look at her in her eyes as she's saying to me, you saved $5.10 today. And see her as maybe, someone's daughter, maybe someone's mother, and she gets up every day, she puts her uniform on, and she comes to work. And it's a practice that if we get into it, all those people that you see on a daily basis, and it's amazing if you're intentional about that, because everybody's got name tags on, right? And if you're intentional about acknowledging people and saying their name, it's amazing, the feedback that you get. I have a training video on this welcome essential that I typically use, and it's a training video that Chick-fil-A used for years for their employees, and it shows people coming into a Chick-fil-A shop, and it superimposes what's going on in their lives over their faces as they come in. And so I use this oftentimes in the workshops that I do to help us in the congregations understand that when people are walking in the doors of our church, something's going on in their lives. And then I show a picture of my own family. 4 years ago, my little grandson Ike was born up in southern New Jersey, and my daughter-in-law is a chemical engineer for DuPont. My son was working for DuPont, and my daughter-in-law was working in the corporate office, and they had a 2-year-old little girl, Abby, and then they had this little boy who was named after my father, Ike, in Mississippi. And this little baby was born not being able to suck or swallow. So they life-flighted him over to the DuPont Hospital for Children, and they determined that he had a real rare neurological disorder called Mobius syndrome that affected the 6th and 7th cranial nerves. So they put a feeding tube in him and sent him home, and it was in October that year, 4 years ago, and my son asked me to find a church, and I found a little church. One church had a website in that little town, so we take little Ike and all the paraphernalia, and we go up to this church, and we leave, we go to the service, we leave, and nobody asked us our name. Small town. No one made any attempt to find out who we were. And my family has given me the permission to use that story over and over again, because it came home to me that there it was in my own family where we go to church on a Sunday and no one acknowledges who we are or that we're there. And what I say about that is that when they show up at your door on a Sunday, and when they come into this church for the first time, the Holy Spirit brought them there. And our job, your job, is to be in relationship with them, not trying to sell them a used car, but to be in relationship with them. And my family needed community, and they didn't get that community. The deep truth, I believe, of the welcome essential then is seeing the other, really seeing the people that come in the doors of this church on a regular basis. And then that we come and let me say this, because of one of the core values that I mentioned to you with this work is relationship. Some questions people might be asking when they come to church here are, where do I fit in? Can I make friends in this church? Is there room for me relationally? Does this church need me? Can I find a place to belong and serve here? Am I safe here? And our job is to really listen to people. So that brings us to the Connect Essential. And the Connect Essential then is absolutely first and foremost about offering a safe space. A safe space where newcomers can come in and share their stories, of what brought them here. The deep truth of Connect is what I call the sacred act of listening. The Connect Essential really, it's about helping people discern their giftedness and their vocation, even in the life work that they do, because every single one of you in here, lay people, you have a vocation, you have your life's work out there, but you are also gifted by God with spiritual gifts and the talents that you have that can be really used not just in the body of Christ, in the fellowship here at Grace St. Luke's, but also that you can use those gifts in the work that you do in the world. It's huge. I think you're going to have someone here come speak about spiritual gifts soon. I noticed it on your rector's forum. But that Connect Essential is really, it's about helping people discern those gifts. What happened to me was, as a Southern Baptist, my mother died when I was 30, and I was a member at First Baptist in Kenner. We lived in New Orleans. I was the director of the concierge department there at the Hyatt Regency Superdome. Had a great job, but my mother died, and it had a pretty powerful impact on me. And I wanted to get more involved in the church. And this church, they asked me to fill out a spiritual gifts inventory, and I did. And my number one spiritual gift is exhortation. Well, they asked me to teach a class of 9th grade girls. And I loved those girls, but I felt like a miserable failure. It was awful. I didn't, it was awful. Within about 3 months, I got out of teaching them, and I found something else to do. I just didn't know what I was doing, But it took me years later. I became Episcopalian, and I go through, I take another spiritual inventory going through Community of Hope, learning how to be a lay chaplain. Guess what my number one spiritual gift is? It's exhortation. Exhortation is encouragement. Teaching is not even on my radar. So no wonder I felt like a failure. So our job as a community is to help people discern their gifts. Because if we're placing people in ministry or have people doing things in ministry that they're not gifted for, then they're going to burn out. The Connect Essential is then offering clear pathways for those newcomers. And you know what? It extends all the way to the people that are in the pews. And I really look forward to talking to this group this afternoon to find out what you're doing around the people that have been here for a long time. Because we all have what I call pew potatoes. You know what those are? So they're the people that are sitting in the pews of Grace St. Luke's, and they've been coming here for years, but they've never gotten involved in ministry. They've never gotten active in ministry. But you know what? It may be, well, they may be holding, their place for when they die, that they can be buried there, or they may just want their daughter to be married here. But the fact is that maybe they've never been even asked to do ministry. Or maybe we've never helped them discern what their vocation is in terms of using those gifts in the body of Christ. And so our job is to help discern those giftedness. When I was telling that story at one church, this guy says, "Oh, those pew potatoes, I guess their children are called tater tots." And I went, "Yes, that's right." The Connect Essential is all about relationship. It's all about relationship. So we were created and we exist in the image of a relational God. And our spiritual and human connections are what give our life meaning. Recent neuroscience research confirms that we humans are hardwired for connection, that our nervous systems actually want us to connect with other human beings. So it shouldn't be surprising that when people join our churches, but they don't find those relationships or those connections that are so vital to their spiritual, mental, and emotional well-being, they go right out the back door in search of those relationships. When I say the deep truth is the sacred act of listening, we relate to those around us by hearing their stories and then connecting them with others. So we build loving communities of faith that God intends for us. And as the body of Christ, we must be very seriously intentional and systematic. Bishop Payne, my boss in Gathering of Leaders, was a chemical engineer before he became a priest. My daughter-in-law is a chemical engineer, and she said, Mary, I bet Bishop Payne is like a taskmaster. I said, you got it. But he's also very systematic, and just 2 days ago, he wrote an article that we're going to publish on my website and this with this material. Because Bishop Payne said, Mary, if I just had Invite, Welcome, Connect when I was a bishop. Because he talked about taking the Diocese of Texas out of a maintenance mode into a missionary mode. And so he for him to say that, 83-year-old bishop, to tell me that Invite, Welcome, Connect can change our church is a pretty powerful statement. I asked our bishop, I think I mentioned to you that I spoke to our diocesan council 2 years ago, and what I said was that I am convinced that we can change the narrative in the Episcopal Church. We can change the narrative, but it's going to take courageous clergy like Richard. Because I see it over and over and over again as I travel around. There are a lot of clergy out there. We had them in our diocese. We have 153 congregations. And we have these clergy that are my age, middle age, who really just don't want to do the work. And they don't want to empower the laity to do the work, to do this work, to change the culture. But it's going to take that. It's going to take leaders like Richard who are really serious about equipping you all to be like little Jesus Christ. And then it's going to take courageous laity in the room who are willing to confront the obstacles that are holding you back from ministry. You have to be willing to step out of your comfort zone for the sake of the gospel, to invite someone to church to discern your own giftedness.